Rise and shine! It's a great day in the North Woods!
How's it going?
Pretty bad portage. Oh my god.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Camp Voyageur podcast. It has been a while, at least as I sit here with my co host, Alex Quanley. It's been a while since he and I circled up for one of our discussions just between the two of us, one of our little fireside chats, so to speak. Although the podcast itself has been rocking and rolling, so I hope that you've been staying in tune, staying in touch, checking out all the episodes that we've been uploading. But today, Alex and I have kind of a unique conversation. I think we've all been in that position, unfortunately, where we've been on a trip and you're going along, maybe things are going great, and then all of a sudden you realize, we forgot something, whatever it is, right? And I think the hope usually is that it's if you have forgotten something or overlooked an item, it's not something that not having it is going to completely wreck the trip. I think the hope is that you can maybe improvise a way around not having that item. But nonetheless, like I said, we've all been in that situation where you forget something. And so on this episode, Alex and I figured let's chat about those items that traditionally seem to get forgotten the most or overlooked the most when you are packing for a trip. What kind of things is it just so easy to accidentally leave behind? We're going to get into all of that today. So pull up a seat. Welcome back. Camp Voyageur podcast. Here we go. Alex, that was my intro. I'm actually really excited about this episode. It's a topic that you and I have been kind of going back and forth on over email for a while now, even though we have chatted sort of high level about it. We haven't shared our thoughts as to these specific items. Like we've done with previous episodes, the deal with this was, okay, I'll make a list of 5 or 6 items that I think are often forgotten on a trip or overlooked when you're packing for a trip. You make a list of 5 or 6 items, and then we'll share and we'll go back and forth. There's the possibility that we have maybe one of the same items. Maybe we each chose the item, but I think this will make for a fun conversation, and hopefully people listening, whether or not they are Camp Voyageur alums, whether or not they are future campers or staff, or maybe they're just people that love the Boundary Waters, they will remember this podcast episode when they are packing for their next trip, and maybe this will help them not forget or not overlook these items. So, with all of that said, how are you feeling about your list of overlooked items?
I'm feeling pretty good. I'm pretty proud of my list. And with the Boundary Waters permits coming up for sale 2 days ago on Wednesday, the end of January here, they were selling like hotcakes. So I know a lot of people are interested in, or a lot of people are planning on going on Boundary Waters trips, especially Mudrow on June 8th, because that was the very first permit I tried to book. There's 5 of them a day. So at 9 o'clock and, 0.01 seconds, I went to Mudrow and they were already gone. So just crazy. But
You didn't go to Mudrow. You went online to get the Mudrow.
yeah, that.
The Mudrow. Yes,
Yeah.
it's kind of funny imagining a permit system where in February you have to show up at the lake to try to claim your prize, claim a permit for the summer. But
Oh God, could you imagine?
what is it about Mudrow? Why is that so popular, do you think?
Uh, that whole western portion of the Boundary Waters, Mudrow gets you into the heart of it pretty quick, and it's above average fishing compared to the rest of the Boundary Waters. There's a little of everything. There's some history with some logging remnants you can find. There's waterfalls, Basswood Falls. There's pictographs. There's some like an old car, an old plane. There's rivers, there's lakes, there's good campsites. there's burn down areas, there's old growth, so there's just a really nice mixture of everything, and the portages aren't too bad, especially if you get up to Crooked Lake. You can usually go a few days without portaging until you if you're heading west until you get to Curtin Falls. That's like your first portage in a couple days. So I'd say for those reasons. And the other hot permits were Little Indian Sioux North and Moose River North. Both of those permits will get you on one end of Loch LaCroix, and Loch LaCroix is a popular destination, big fishing lake. The other hot permit that I noticed, I know there was, they're all pretty hot really, but the hottest I'm going over is the other one is Little Gabriel, and that's just close to Ely. Again, good fishing, and it doesn't take you long to get away from people if you're willing to take a few portages.
Yeah, even Mudrow, I'm thinking to get there, it's a bit of a drive, and there are a couple turns, and I think if I remember correctly, at least the last time I was there, you're eventually just going on like a gravel road, but nonetheless, like it's pretty easy to get there from Ely. It's like not
Yeah,
that hard to drive there. So maybe that has to do with the popularity as well.
yeah,
Well, good on you for sticking with it and getting some good permits for
yeah.
this coming summer.
So I got a few angleworms, a few fall lakes, which takes an extra day, but you can get to the same places you go to Mudrow, a Stewart River, some farm lakes. So the backup permits aren't too bad either, but regardless, the best way to find better fish, excuse me, find better fishing and get away from the crowds is always going to be, going a few portages in, a few days in, not just setting up base camp within a day's paddle of an entry point.
Going a few days in and hopefully making sure you have all of your stuff packed, which is a good dovetail into today's topic. Let's get into it. Again, we're talking about items that are so easily and often overlooked on the trail. Or another way of spinning that, I suppose, would be items that just get forgotten, sadly, on a trip. I'll start off here because the first one I have is very small, but it is something that if you don't have it, I speak from experience, it can be very frustrating. It's not a dire situation, but very, very small item. What I would say, so easy to overlook, and this might get some laughs from people that are hearing this, but chapstick, a stick of chapstick. And I say this because it's easily overlooked in the sense that you think, well, my lips aren't going to get chapped because I'm in the Boundary Waters in the middle of summer. It's not winter. It's not usually that cold. If anything, it's pretty hot throughout the day and the night. However, where that is faulty is I have found on the trip my lips, and I've been with campers on trips, and this has happened too. They say that their lips get chapped, or almost it feels like chapped, but really what it is sunburned because the sun can be so intense when you're sitting in that canoe paddling all day, and also windburn from paddling, especially if you're in the bow. When you're paddling, you don't think about it because it doesn't feel like you're paddling that quickly, or it might not feel like there's that much wind. But nonetheless, you are going forward for several, many hours for the day when you're paddling, and that can just get really abrasive on your lips. And so this comes to me from a specific memory on a trip. I think it was probably a 4-day or a 5-day or something. But by like day 2, everybody on my trip, including myself, we were saying, gosh, my lips are killing me. And we opened the first aid kit and we were looking around and we were like, gosh, there's no chapstick in here. We ended up having to try to put like first aid cream on our lips, which wasn't very effective because first aid cream is not built to be a a protectant in that sense. It just your skin kind of absorbs it, your lips absorb it, and then that's it. And also, it tastes really bad, and your lips are kind of numb after that. It's awful. It's not built for. It probably even says on it like it's not for whatever oral consumption. So you're not
Yeah.
supposed to put first aid cream on your lips. I don't think. Disclaimer here: I don't recommend it. You shouldn't do it. Uh, but ever since then, ever since that instance of all of us having lips that were sunburned and windburned, I have always remembered, okay, either tell everybody on the trip to bring some chapstick or at least put a chapstick or some lip balm or some type of lip salve in your first aid kit to protect against this.
That's a good one. And I will say it's often overlooked and often lost because if you have it in your pocket or something, it's easy to slide out when you're sitting in a canoe, or I've lost mine uh, going in like above waist water for whatever reason, pulling a canoe up rapids or just flipping the canoe or swimming, and your chapstick just floats away and down it goes. So, and yes, I've experienced very chapped lips on the trail, and that's no fun. So,
In the middle of summer, which is the time that you would least expect it. And to your point about pockets, if they get nothing else out of this conversation, always have zippered pockets when you're on the trail. Open pockets, never good. At the bare minimum, a pocket that closes with Velcro or something. But I prefer when I'm going on the trip, I like to bring pants and a life vest and shirts that have pockets that can close and seal in some fashion, whether it's with a zipper or Velcro or something like that.
hmm.
So that's my first item, chapstick. If anybody's keeping a list at home, how about your first item?
My first item is a flexible cutting board. So they're really cheap. You can find them. I got mine on Amazon. You can get like a 6 pack of rainbow colors or something. I bought a few dozen of them for camp, and they're really nice for filleting fish. That's the primary reason I use them. Because I've filleted plenty of fish on a canoe paddle, which is okay, but really slippery. And I've filleted fish on the back of a bottom of a canoe, on rocks, and all of that can work. But flexible cutting board, find a good flat rock that's about waist or chest high, so you don't have to bend over so much, like a big erratic rock, glacial erratic, on the side of the shore, and just makes cleaning fish way easier. And it's really easy to clean too.
I think that's a really good item. And I also think, aside from filleting fish, especially nowadays at Camp Voyageur, even more so than years past or decades past, we try to really uh, emphasize good meals on the trail with whatever it is, fresh vegetables or sausage or something that you can cut up. And a cutting board, a flexible cutting board can make such a difference for something like that when you have to slice and dice vegetables. And I think it can actually be somewhat dangerous if you don't have something like that, because if you don't have anything to cut the vegetables or a sausage up, I think what kind of happens then sometimes is maybe people try to slice and dice in their hand, like while they're holding the vegetable. And as people can imagine, that's just a recipe for danger. You're going to the potential there to slice open a finger or slice open your palm or something is really great. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
and it's
good one.
it's better for your knife. You're not hitting your knife on a rock or something, and uh, yeah, it's really easy to pack away too. It's you just slide it. We use the square corrugated plastic boxes for our food, but you could easily slide it into a barrel, and I mean, it's 0.001 ounces or whatever it weighs and takes up nothing. So really
Yeah,
easy one.
good one. So my second item is it's sort of a multi-purpose item. It's not necessarily something with one specific use, but it's something that just you can improvise. It just comes in handy. A lot of times it's better to have it and maybe not need it rather than to need it and not have it. And that's a spare plastic bag or a spare Ziploc bag or something like that. It's again like your cutting board. It's so small and it weighs nothing. So easy to just fold up and tuck into a corner of the pack. You could even take a couple of spare plastic bags. But the uses off the top of my head as I was making this list, I was thinking, well, first and foremost, it can become a trash sack. Now, you probably have other bags that you could use as trash, but it just never hurts to have one as an option. So you could put trash in it, especially if it's a Ziploc bag or something like that. You just might have stuff as the trip goes along that you want to keep dry for whatever reason, whether it's a phone, whether it's a watch, whether it's a wallet, who knows? But there are sometimes when just something comes up, or maybe a camper has something, maybe you didn't know they were going to take it on the trail, like a watch or something, and you think, gosh, you don't really need this. But at the same time, if I take it away from you, I don't want it to get wet and get destroyed. So I'll stick it in this bag to keep dry. Um, on the flip side of that, though, there are it can hold wet stuff and keep wet stuff from getting everything else in your pack wet, right? If you, I'm thinking of, for example, maybe you have a pair of dry shoes at the campsite, right? And those shoes, you want to keep them dry, obviously, by their name, but sometimes stuff happens and your dry shoes will get wet. Well, then you don't want to pack your wet dry shoes, right? You don't want to pack wet shoes in with all your other dry gear, your clothing, your sleeping bag, and all of that. So again, put them in a bag, seal them up. That ensures that, yeah, they will stay wet, but they won't get everything else that's supposed to be dry in the pack soaking wet. And also, I just think it's nice to have a spare plastic bag, because that can be a bag that is a separate bag for something like first aid trash, which for whatever reason, you might not want to mix it with just your food trash and other stuff like that. So small item, so easy to overlook. It's almost like if you bring it, you probably will use it. You'll probably find a use for a spare plastic bag at some point. So that's my other item.
Yeah. And we pack our food in those clear plastic bread bags that you can find in bulk. And I always threw in a few extra, especially for cleaning fish. Those, you need one for the bag for the breading, a bag for the clean fillets, maybe a bag for the carcass before you go dispose of it. So there's 3 bags right there that you can use, and it's always nice to have extra bags to stuff trash in, really is what I use it a lot for.
Yeah, trash, or like I said, there's so many uses. If somebody wants to go out and collect blueberries or raspberries, of course they could just put them in a pot or something. But especially if it's like at a portage or something, and maybe you don't want to go digging out your pots and pans to give them something to put in. Just say, here's a plastic bag, go put them in this. So
Yeah.
yeah. How about another item from you?
My next one is biodegradable liquid soap, along with a small green scrubby or scouring pads, I think they're called. And there's debates on whether biodegradable soap is actually biodegradable, but it's still better than regular soap. And if you dispose of it properly, not in the lake, 200 feet away from shore. And you also don't need to use much. Like literally a drop in your pan is all you need. And it makes a huge difference trying to clean greasy pans, or making having a big pot or a basin or a water bag, put a little of that soap in there and use it for everyone to clean their hands before or after a meal. Um, and like I said, a little drop goes a long way. So I bring a tiny little bottle. Like it probably stores 0.5 ounces or something. It's really small, and just a drop in a pan onto a hot, like if you have a really messy pan, like with you made rice and beans and cheese and you didn't have enough water, you'll get a really sticky pan. So you put some water in there, put a drop in, and put it on the heat, but on the fire, and let it sit for a while. It makes it cleaning that pan just amazing.
This is a great item, and I think back, I remember the evolution of getting to this item, getting to biodegradable soap, which is to say, I remember when I was a 10-year-old camper, 11-year-old camper, obviously many decades ago, you would just bring soap, like a bottle, like a little bit of like dial soap, like dish soap or something like that. And the thinking was, yeah, you can just use regular soap because the amount of soap you are using is so minuscule compared to the size of a big lake or something. It's just not a big deal. You can bring regular soap. Obviously, then opinions changed, and there was this thought of, well, you shouldn't use regular soap in the lake. And yet, it was kind of biodegradable soap. I'm sure it had been invented, but it hadn't become as prevalent as it is now. So then, when I was like a teenager going on trips, the thinking or the prevailing idea was you just don't take soap on the trail. You just use water, right? Because we knew it was bad to use regular soap, but biodegradable soap or something like that was not really around. So you would just use water and it was effective. It was fine, especially if to your point, if you would heat it up, if you would kind of boil it. But that that's a whole process. Like, cleaning, you have to wait for the boiling water to cool before you scrub. And even still, it doesn't get stuff fully clean if you're just using only water and no soap. And
Hmm.
then now, recently, within the past few years, you can go into any camping store and buy the biodegradable soap. It's pretty easily, widely available, and it's great because it's really effective, and you know that you think or you trust that it's better for the environment.
Yeah.
I have a couple others that I could mention here, but the first one I will say, this is, I guess, two items, put them together. This is in your world. This is fishing related.
Oh yeah.
Uh, I would say a net and a stringer. Um, and I say often overlooked because I can remember trips, fishing trips that I have been on where both of these things have been forgotten, and not having them poses a problem, a problem, kind of at both ends, catching the fish and then saving the fish. First of all, it's kind of a pain to bring a net on a trip, especially if it's not a fishing trip, right? Because it's a very large item. It can be kind of cumbersome and awkward across portages. Doesn't really easily fit into a canoe snugly the way that like a couple paddles will or something. So it's just easy to overlook a net, and yet, gosh, I remember being on a trip where we didn't have a net, and it's just heartbreak after heartbreak, right? Because you get big fish on the line, you get them close to the canoe, and then snap, the line breaks, and you think, if we had had a net, we could have taken this fish in. Um, so a net, and then on the flip side, I remember once it was a pickerel trip, and we were catching fish, and we didn't have a stringer, we didn't have anywhere to put them. Um, and so what we ended up doing, if I remember correctly, is we were at a campsite. We had like a base camp. So we kind of created this little pin where we could keep the fish like in the water, like enclosing the
I think I
fish.
know where this is going.
Well, yeah, anybody that's been to pickerel probably remembers for decades there was an old snapping turtle that that knew that I think this snapping turtle knew that this campsite, there was always going to be a meal fish somewhere, and the snapping turtle got into the pin where we kept the fish, and I don't think it actually ate the fish. I think probably it just like smelled the fish, knew that the fish were there, and sort of wrecked the little pin. And I'm assuming all the fish kind of just swam away. Now, obviously, if you have a stringer, it can still fish can still get eaten by a snapping turtle, so the stringer doesn't eliminate that. But the point is, when you're planning for a fishing trip, a lot of the planning is for catching the fish, right? Like, what lures are we going to use? Do we have live bait? Does everybody have their rod and reel? Do we have an extra rod and reel? Right? It's all like preparatory for catching the fish. It's so easy to forget, like, oh yeah, but what are we going to do when we do actually catch the fish? How are we going to keep them? So bring a stringer. To that point, I guess it's also easy to overlook if you're going to cook the fish, stuff like butter and batter and all of that. That's the other end of catching the fish as well. But yeah, a net and a stringer. I speak from experience. Don't forget them.
Yeah. I don't take a net, but I don't fish without one in a motorboat, but in a canoe, it doesn't make the cut. I encourage kids to let the fish fight for a minute or two, and then they become really docile. And that's the most fun part about catching a fish is the battle. So they fight for a little bit, get the fish a little docile. And, the first fish we catch, I try to teach them all how to pick up a fish by the back really quick. But pike are a little scary, and it'd be nice to have a net for those. And while I've got the spiky back, so it'd certainly be nice to have. It's just, it doesn't make the cut. And then you get issues with treble hooks getting, the net just getting all, hooks just getting all caught in the net. But I'd probably have a few more fish under my belt with one. Um, and yeah, the stringer, I take one on every trip. I've forgotten them before and just been able to make one out of paracord, just making a bowline loop on one end and running the fish through it. But an actual stringer is always nice.
Yeah, I think that speaks to what we said about, look, the hope is if you do overlook items, by and large, there are ways to improvise around not having that item.
Yeah.
And a stringer would be an example. Even a net, if you don't have a net, like you said, you can still bring in the fish. There's a method to the way that you can tire out the fish and then bring it into the canoe. Easier to do if you're an experienced fisherman. It's an experienced angler. It's a little harder if you're an excited. If you got a kid who's
Yeah.
really excited, 10-year-old kid, he's caught his first fish or something.
They just want to rip it into the boat, and that's
Yeah.
always a recipe for flopping and getting off and breaking lines. And
Yep, exactly. But yeah, there are ways to improvise around this, fortunately. Um, but as with all these items, it's kind of easier to have it than to not have it. So that's my
yeah, rather, what was the saying? Rather not need it and have it than need it and not have it.
exactly. Yeah, it's better to have it and not need it or not use it than to need it. Oh gosh, we need a stringer. We need a stringer, and then you don't have it. Especially if you don't have any paracord or something. It's like, well, what do? We
Yeah.
make one out of, I don't know, weave some grass
Roots.
together. Yeah, some roots together and improvise even further.
Yeah. Well, my next one is an extra paddle. Uh, Imagine you got six people, three canoes. If one of those paddles breaks and you got a little wind or some miles to cover, you're gonna have a tough journey. So it's often overlooked or ignored because it's one extra thing to carry on a portage and one more thing to keep track of. But I've had to, I think 2 trips I've had to use that emergency paddle. You know, however many trips I've done, 30 or 50, I don't know how many I've done. I haven't used it. And so you get a little complacent and not bringing it, but I've since come back around and I make sure to bring one on every trip.
Yeah, this is a great item. I think we're maybe a little bit more fortunate now in the material that paddles are made out of. I think, again, going back to my earliest days as a camper, it was predominantly wood. Like all paddles were made out of wood, really. And um, I think in that sense, the likelihood that there was a greater likelihood that a paddle might break on a trip or crack on a trip. But nonetheless, I've seen even paddles, whatever they're made out of, aluminum or some sort of like carbon fiber. I've seen every kind of paddle break, and um, this is one that's yeah. I mean, this can really, if you don't have any way to move, especially if you don't have um, so like a duffer on the trip that has a paddle. Like if you don't have a paddle, it's going to really impact the trip in probably a negative way.
Unless you run into a moose scapula and lash it to a stick.
Yeah, there are a couple ways to improvise. One of the ways that you could do is, and none of these are like as ideal as having a real paddle. Like you're still gonna this is hard, but like one of the things you can do is if you find a branch that is a shaped like essentially, it's like a long pole and then it splits into two. You can tie some like a tarp or piece of a tarp around that
Hmm.
split and kind of make I don't know what you'd say, almost like it would look like a sail or something, right? But you're using it to stick in the water. Another iteration of that is if you find that same stick and then it branches into two, where it branches like that, if you put a sleeping bag stuff sack over that branch and then you tie it down, that would create this a similar type of um, like flat surface that you could use as a paddle. But I don't think if it's a long trip, this is not something that you would want to go like multiple days on end trying to use these things because they, as you can imagine, they would get filled with water in all the wrong places and everything. So, um, yeah, you kind of have to have a paddle.
Yeah.
I will jump on the extra bandwagon. You said extra paddle. Mine's much smaller and definitely not as much of an emergency as a paddle, but I always stick in an extra book in my pack because um, you, especially if you have times or days where you're just going to be hanging out at the campsite, you recommend everybody on your trip bring a book, but inevitably there's going to be either there's going to be one of two things is going to happen. Either somebody forgets a book, they don't have it, or it's going to be a 6 day trip, and after the first day, somebody on your trip is going to say, "Well, I finished my book." And so you're like, oh, shoot. Well, then what are you going to do for the rest of the time when we're just hanging around the campsite? So I always like to stick an extra book in there, maybe a book that I don't know is like kind of just something that would appeal to anybody and everybody on the trip. Uh, and then you always have it to offer somebody on your trip that forgets their book or finishes their book or something like that. So stick an extra book in the pack.
Yeah. That's a hit or miss. You never know if your trip's going to melt through all their books and be exchanging books on the trip and reading them all or not reading at all. So, yeah. And if you need book recommendations, Island Solitaire and what's your other book? Dirt,
Yeah, I got Why We Climb.
Why We Climb
Yeah. Yeah.
by John Bergman.
Shameless plug from
Yeah.
Alex there. I appreciate it though. Yeah, those are my
Yeah.
books. But I guess if yeah, to your point, like some people don't like reading on the trail. I don't know. There are an extra deck of cards, something like that. That actually kind of relates to my next one. But yeah, I like to read on the trail. I've found that the trail can actually be a really good place for introducing kids to the idea of reading because they don't have the distraction of their cell phone
hmm
or their smartphone, which I think is one of the main items that pulls kids away from reading kind of in the real world outside, is they might they sit down to read or sit down for some quiet time and their phone's right there and they pick it up and before you know it they're locked into their phone and on the trail you don't have that option. So you give them a book and say, "Yeah, just try this. Like just try to sink into this."
Yeah, reading for leisure is something that sometimes people don't get at all. It's always been for an assignment in school or something or work, and they think, wow, I can actually read like for leisure and pleasure, whatever I want. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And you get time to do it out on trips.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, my next one, and I wish I had it here because I would have played something, is a harmonica for sitting around the campfire or sitting in the tent before bed. Sometimes I'd play it, and I bring a little waterproof notebook with 10 songs or something that I play, and it's easy to learn. And I mean, campfires and harmonicas have been a good marriage since cowboys in the 1800s or whenever harmonicas came around. But uh, easy instrument to play, and music is in short supply out there. I mean, unless you're bringing your phone or a speaker, which you shouldn't do, but we don't do that. So the only music we get would be a harmonica. So um, music is, I think, it's always loved by people, but it's even more heightened out there, people's love for music because it's so rare. So good tune around the fire can lift spirits and put people to bed.
Yeah, you and I both play the harmonica. I love it, and I always thought we should sell them at the on the porch. That'd be a really good item to sell there. That's
Right.
sort of a
Get
side note.
50 kids playing harmonica.
Sure, why not? Have an ensemble.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
And
I just
kazoos, harmonicas and kazoos.
there you go. Yeah, well, this is good because this kind of leads into my next item. So I'll just kind of jump into it because it's related to the idea of a harmonica. I wasn't sure how to describe it. I suppose it's just a category of items rather than a single item, your harmonica being something that fits into this. But I said a small, unexpected item of whimsy. And so, what I mean by this is ideally it's something for the group. I even think it's something that maybe the group isn't expected. They don't know you have brought it on the trail. And
Like
it's
a
maybe something.
watermelon.
Well, it's something you can pull out as a surprise once the trip is underway, something that can be fun for the group. So, for example, some of the things that I've taken on trips or had on trips, a frisbee. That's something, especially if you're going to a place like on Isle Royale or something where you know that there's maybe a pockets of more open space or kind of grassland. A hacky sack, that's another real obvious one. Um, I've been on a trip. I remember when somebody brought like a little palette of watercolor paints, and they brought a couple blank pieces of paper and some brushes. So, and another item too. There is an endless supply of games that you can create at a campsite with just a tennis ball. And so a tennis ball or any sort of little ball or bouncy ball could also be added to this list. But again, that's what I said, a small unexpected item of whimsy, just something that the people on the trip aren't expecting. You can pull it out and create all sorts of games or just have a moment of hanging out, togetherness, enjoying this item, having some fun with it. Think outside the box with something that you can bring. It could be even something like a yo-yo or something like that. But small item can make a big difference on a trip. Can even become, in some ways, like the marquee item of the trip, right? If people get really into the games that you play with it and stuff.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I don't think this falls into the category of whimsy or whimsical, but I've seen counselors bring watermelon, melons, a bowling ball, just odd things like that that just they just I guess help entertain the troops.
Well,
I-
wait a minute. Who's carrying a bowling ball across the portage? That sounds like a punishment more so than a fun item of whimsy.
yeah, well, I've seen kids hide rocks in their counselor's pack and not tell them till the last day of the trip. But yeah, no, in 2021, a group went from International Falls to Lake Superior, and Kyle Montgomery was the counselor from Texas, and he got a bowling ball at a thrift shop, and they made it their mission to take that thing for the whole trip, just to say they did, and just so people like us are talking about them in 4 years.
Would this be probably, I'm guessing, the first ever and maybe the only ever bowling ball brought into the Boundary Waters?
That's what I said. It has to be, right?
I would think, and the I guess the only maybe asterisk to that would be in the pre-Boundary Waters days when there were those fancy resorts on places like Basswood. If any of those had a bowling alley, which I suppose is possible, but maybe unlikely. And
Yeah.
Ely used to have a bowling alley, so there was, uh, people were into bowling in Ely. But I don't know. I would stake the claim that maybe Camp Voyager has brought the one and only ever bowling ball into the Boundary Waters.
Yep. Yep. And I will maybe not in this category, but a hammock would be the other one I'd add to something that can add a lot of fun to the trip, and kids like to take turns in it and stuff. So good entertainment.
Yeah, hammock's a good one. I think places like a even like a dollar store. Goodwill is a good, thrift stores. Those are good places to find just random items of whimsy like this.
Squirt
Dollar
guns.
Squirt guns is that's a great one. Dollar stores are great for getting these little items and these little games. Um, and I'm even thinking of all sorts of like board games that have travel versions, whether it's chess or Battleship or uh, something like that. That would qualify uh, for this category as well.
Hmm.
Man, I'm still thinking about the bowling ball. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I'd like, yeah. How
Well,
can how can we top that? I wonder what the next random, unprecedented item brought into the Boundary Waters related to whimsy
let's not
will
try to
be.
top bowling ball because I can't imagine how you would try to top
Yeah,
that. But
yeah.
my next one I've got is water flavoring, and I think the liquid kind works the best just because you don't want to be dealing with like a Crystal Light packet in the Boundary Waters, and it's easier to control the dosage. But just a couple drops of something like Mio or some other brand of water flavoring really helps kids drink a lot more. And I think you could get fancier one these days that have electrolytes or even caffeine I've seen, but just any sort of sweetener really helps with dehydration because it really creeps up on you on canoe trips, dehydration. And because you really got to kind of force the water in ways that you don't have to at home. And I always tell kids you should have a liter of water drank before lunch at minimum. And and then at lunch we stop and I say, well, if you guys haven't gone to the bathroom since breakfast, you need to chug water right now. So that's one of the tips I have for hydration.
Yeah, that's a really good one because dehydration on the trail it's really tricky dehydration because you relate it to I'll drink water when I'm thirsty. But what I've found with dehydration, and even like the minor stages, I've never had an instance on a trip where there was like severe dehydration. Fortunately, we've always caught it beforehand. But even at the kind of preliminary stages of it, you're thirsty. If you're not having water, you're you'll be thirsty. But if you don't drink in that initial period when you're thirsty, your thirst kind of, I don't think it doesn't like go away, but you sort of get that desire to drink. Um, it's, I don't know, it's not as strong. It's like your body gets used to, okay, I was thirsty and there wasn't a drink. So let's like move on. To your point of why you have to almost like force kids or urge them to drink because sometimes they might be beyond this stage where they are thirsty. And so they don't realize that they're getting dehydrated. Obviously, side note here, I'm not a doctor, you're not a doctor. So we're not speaking expertly on dehydration, just kind of personal experience here that it's uh, you can get dehydrated and look back and think, oh, gosh, I wasn't like that thirsty, but somehow I got dehydrated. It's a
Hmm.
weird thing.
Yeah, and people just aren't used to drinking that much water, so it takes some learning. And um, I also say if you feel like you're getting sleepy in the morning, like say between breakfast and lunch, you shouldn't be feeling like sleepy at that point. Maybe after lunch you could feel sleepy. The Get the jams, just ate must sleep. But certainly in those morning hours of paddling, you shouldn't be feeling sleepy. And I often see that's a sign of dehydration if people are a little lethargic at that time.
Headaches too. That's another one. If
Hmm.
people are saying they have a headache, that can be a sign that they're a little dehydrated. Especially if you can ask them, well, do you normally get headaches? And if they say no, then an initial first step into trying to figure out what the case might be as a counselor on a trip can be, well, drink some water and let's see.
Hmm.
I have one more item. It's a little outside the box, veering from our base topic of often overlooked items, but more of an advice thing, I suppose, rather than an item. But I said an itinerary that includes more than just evening destinations. Um, it's so easy to overlook when you're planning a trip, to overlook some of the cool things that you can do and plan to do during the day. I think a lot of times when designing a trip, especially as a counselor or staff member, you define the days by, okay, where are we going to sleep, right? Like we'll get to this campsite and then tomorrow night we'll get to this campsite. And that's important to do, of course. Like that should be, in a lot of ways, that's like the skeleton of your itinerary. But don't forget to populate the itinerary with other things that other sites that you plan to see and places that you can go and do during the day. Like I said, it's not really an overlooked item, but more almost like just an overlooked uh, planning thing that I think it's important to think of things that how are you going to fill? Okay, yeah, you're going to get to the campsite at night, 4 o'clock, whatever, 5 o'clock. Like, what are you going to do until then? Like, what cool things are you going to see? Where are you going to go? So put that on the itinerary as well. It's I think it's better to have almost like an itinerary that's a little too detailed rather than something that just is not detailed enough.
I like that one. That's because so often it's like, okay, between breakfast and lunch, that's when we put on our miles and cover ground. And afternoon is more all about getting to your destination. So, and some of my favorite days have been finding something neat in the morning or typically around lunch or like a good lunch spot and you eat, maybe take a little nap, everyone on a rock, and then some kids start to throw some lines in the water, and then some kids start go swimming, and it's like 2, 3 p.m. It's like, all right, well, let's just go to the nearest campsite and call it a day, and you end up having a really fun afternoon. So, and yeah, you miss so much by just traveling all morning uh, and ignoring all the neat things you're going right past.
One of the things that I like to do when I'm planning a trip and I'm looking at the maps is I like to pick out like in a day. So let's say, for example, like let's say we're going from Fall Lake up to somewhere else, right? Like wherever we're going to stay that night. So I trace the route on the map, Fall Lake to this campsite where I want to get throughout the day. And in the route, I try to pick out like three or four areas on the map or things on the map, topography that just I think looks kind of interesting, right? And I kind of try to remember that for that day when we are paddling. I want to check this stuff out. Of course, a lot of times stuff that maybe looks interesting on the map, once you're there in person, you're like, I don't know, like it just doesn't look any different than the other topography that I see. But every now and then, whether it's a little rapids or whether it's maybe you notice on the map like, wow, this elevation looks really crazy. Like this might be like a really cool cliff that we can observe from our canoes or something. Or even like a little like a river or creek or a little channel. Like, oh, we could maybe like explore this thing. This looks kind of cool. Maybe we could go a quarter mile up this little river and just check it out, cast a fishing line or something. Yeah, just pick out like three or four spots on the map for every day that are maybe look interesting.
Hmm. I know one counselor that would give the kids on his trip, he'd have them take turns being king for a day. And so I think they would get one, when you were king, you'd get one instance where you could choose if you see something and point to it and say, let's go there, the whole group has to listen, even if it's 2 miles behind you or so it could get maybe out of hand, but the idea is right where a kid could see something cool on the shore and they go paddle to it. So
Yeah, I like that a lot. I would maybe amend it to the king for the day. When you make your choice of let's go there, you have to be paddling. You can't be duffing.
yeah.
Because if you say let's go there, if it's
Yeah.
2 miles away, okay, but you better be part of this the work here that gets us there, rather than just sitting in your duffing throne, ordering us to paddle 2 miles out of the way to get you somewhere. But I do like that a lot.
Yeah. So So I did five. I've got one/two. They're both clothing related, more to cover. And the one is pants and long sleeves, because so often you see guys in just their swimsuits, no shirt, no life jacket. So much skin is exposed, and yeah, the wind maybe feels good on your skin, and you'll have a good tan, and everyone will know you've been on a fun trip, but that sun just zaps the energy right out of you if you let it like that. And it's like an oxymoron or something that you actually stay cooler with more clothes on, but you actually do because your skin is shaded from the sun if you have long sleeve and long pants like that lightweight uh, synthetic non-cotton clothing like quick dry stuff. So even when it's 95 degrees, you stay covered up, and you might stink a little more, but that sun will take it all out of you. And I've really noticed the energy level difference based on what kids are wearing. The one wearing the least amount is more tired than the one wearing the most.
Yeah, that's a good one. It makes me think also, uh, another often overlooked item. Hopefully, you're somebody's wearing long sleeves to your point, and they don't really have to use this too heavily. But just a sunscreen is. I've been on trips before where you forget the sunscreen. Nowadays, camp's pretty good. I mean, camp is good about putting it in the first aid kit, but nonetheless, you have some in the first aid kit, but if everybody on the trip forgets sunscreen, like that's going to be a lot more complicated. You're going to be using a lot more. And it should be the counselor's responsibility, of course, to make sure that everybody has that. But nonetheless, um, easily overlooked because it's such a small thing. But oh man, sunburn can really wreck a trip. No, not wreck it, but it can make it pretty uncomfortable for
It
everybody
can wreck
because this
it.
it can the sun's pretty intense, and if you're on a 5 day, 6 day, 7 day, you can get fried day one, right? And um, it's gonna create some discomfort. Best way to avoid that for the most part is, to your point, wear long sleeves, wear long pants. Um,
Yeah, then the only sunscreen you need if you're doing that is maybe the backs of your hands, maybe the back of your neck. If you're wearing like a wide brim hat, you might not even need that, but maybe your nose and a little on your face. That's it. And so you can also help, save on the pollution of sunscreen in the lake and greasy hands and all that. So
and sunscreen on the lips. Going back to my
that's
chapstick
right.
one, my
Yeah,
first one. Don't
chapstick
forget, it's so easy to put it all over your face, but then to forget your lips. That's
comes full circle.
it comes full circle. Yeah.
My other clothing one on that was like a dry fleece or down jacket, even in the summer. So most people think to take it other times of the year, but maybe in the heat of July or going on a 4th of July trip, even stick that long jacket in your pack, even if it's 90 degrees, because hypothermia is more common in the summer, and a cold rainstorm can really be miserable if you're just wearing a t-shirt under your rain jacket. And so a nice fleece or down jacket can save your group a lot of discomfort.
Especially if you're, I mean, in addition to the points you made about hypothermia and whatnot, if you are paddling on a trip in sort of those bookend weeks or bookend months of summer, meaning like June or maybe late August, it can be the swings in temperature can be pretty intense. It can be blistering during the day, but then at night it can get pretty darn cold once that sun sets. And so you might not think it when it's noon and you're roasting, but once that sun goes down, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, certainly later in the evening, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, it can get pretty darn cold, surprisingly so.
Mhm.
And to the point where, yeah, short sleeve shirt is probably not going to be enough cover for that.
Hmm.
How do we do with our list? Do you think I think we covered a lot of ground. I'm sure people listening, um, maybe they have their own ideas. Be great if they could let us know if we forgot one item that people feel strongly about that they've experienced sort of the trouble of forgetting it on a trip. We'd love to hear about it because I think unfortunately the possibilities are kind of endless in terms of items that can get overlooked.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think we came up with a really good list and it helps give me some mental reps for packing coming up here this summer. I'll probably be out on a few trips, but yeah, our last few gear episodes have gotten picked up some more downloads lately. So I know people are starting to really think about trips and plan. So hopefully we can help them a little bit have a better experience.
Real quick, can you tell people that are listening if they want to learn more about Camp Voyager, if they want to get in touch with us, if they want to stay stoked with us on social media and all that, where should they go?
You can head to www.campvoyager.com to learn more about the summer camp. And camp also has a Facebook page, Instagram page, and a YouTube page. And if you want to connect with you or I guess you could comment on one of the social media posts or message directly in Facebook or Instagram. Or my email is alex@campvoyager.com. So
Rock on. Alex, it's good to see you again. Let's do another one of these soon. We'll pick another topic, or if there's a topic that people want us to riff on, let us know.
yeah,
And we'll be back again.
yes, thanks, John.